let's make loads of cash. I think if you and I will put our heads together, we can do that. But what kind of money is the question, and who is it that you as an individual want to be? I love to have a good night's sleep.
Business is failing. They're not keeping up with what they should be keeping up with. So I think it's also important to kind of remind the CEOs out there that you need to keep innovating.
I'm sorry to say to everyone, but it's all politics. So we are all politicians, and that's of course so sad.
Money does still win this game.
We're here with Nordic Business Forum, and I'm your host, Heli. Today, we'll be talking about the end of the neutral CEO. To help me build a playbook for corporate activism, I'm joined by Annika Arras, the CEO of Milton Nordics, and Thomas Kolster, an experienced marketing and advisor and author. We'll be talking about what CEO and corporate activism really mean in today's context, why it's a timely topic, and maybe most importantly, how to do it well. For decades, a safe place for any CEO was somewhere in the middle, but that's no longer the case. The latest Edelman Trust Barometer shows that 70% of people are unwilling or hesitant to trust someone with different views. And here's the twist. The same people are looking not to their politicians, but to their employers to bridge that divide. So leaders are faced with a dilemma. If they're pressured to take a stand, but if they do, they risk leaving some of their stakeholders out. And if they stay silent, they still risk leaving some of their stakeholders out. So there's no established universal framework here on how to succeed. But there's consequences for doing it wrong. And so the question is how to lead through polarization without breaking your company. Let's dive in. I'm here today with Thomas Kolster. You're author of books Goodvertising and The Hero Trap, and you're also referred to as a marketing activist. Welcome to the show. Good to have you.
Thank you so much. It almost seems like the most fitting title, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it's all about corporate activism.
Exactly.
Marketing activist, yes.
That's why you're here. Good to have you here. And Annika Arras, you're the founder and CEO of Milton Nordics, and also a true expert in political communications and women's empowerment. Great to have you as well.
Great to be here, and I think I'm the least neutral CEO, so we can do some activism here today.
That's how we like it. And it's a good combination because, Thomas, you are more from the sustainability angle and you have a lot of political experience, and we can get a good show running from here on. Let's start with the basics. Thomas, would you like to share a little bit, like what does CEO and corporate activism, what does it mean in today's world?
I mean, it's been an ever-changing topic, to be honest. I think in some cases it does seem a bit like public masturbation, quite self-serving, and the rest of us kind of have to watch it. I mean, my early sort of days witnessing corporate activism sort of started around my first book called Goodvertising. And at that time, it was companies that I think most of us know in the activist space, like Ben & Jerry's, Body Shop, typically big global multinationals that today have become household names in sort of corporate activism. But I think that is quite dramatically changing right now. There's a lot of geopolitical things happening that is changing that scope. But I think also we're growing up, like the territory. So it's almost like we've had the sort of infancy days of corporate activism, and now I think, as you touched on in the intro, we're seeing its limitations, and I think that's a good thing.
Well said. Do you, Annika, have anything to add? How do you see it?
Yeah, it's maybe I will describe a little bit of the journey that I have gone through to kind of define it also for myself. Yeah. I remember, like, 15 years ago when I did my MBA in Estonian Business School, then we had this professor who gave us a long lecture about Milton Friedman. And he defined in the 70s that, businesses are made to earn money, and any CEO who is trying to do any societal things is considered like a hypocrite because, this is the job of politicians. And then I remember I went to another class, and then there was a professor who said that, well, there is this growing trend in the world that actually companies do need to take a stance on societal issues. I was totally confused. I'm like, which way it is then now?
You got the two polarized.
So it like, but that was like 15 years ago. But today, I think you really can't choose not to be involved, because the world has become so complex that you have to be involved. But the trick there absolutely is that how much to be involved. But over the years, I have come to only one basic conclusion, and that is it's very difficult to live in conflict with your own personal values. So I guess this is where it all starts. Before you build any corporate principles or societal relations, I think you need to look in the mirror first. Like, who are you, or who you want to be?
Yeah, exactly. Well said. Do you were about to say something?
I think the challenge is also that there has been this sort of rising expectations, and obviously there are quite big geographical differences between, for example, being in Scandinavia or being in the US or in the UK. For me, compared to the early days of corporate activism, I started seeing some mistakes and I started seeing some failures. And that's kind of why I had to write the second book, The Hero Trap, because when I looked at some of the early companies, like we can take Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's, I think, was one of those that was a hero of mine in the beginning. But then you start seeing, later, and I think this is your Milton thing, it's almost like good is only as good as a spreadsheet. Because if your activism doesn't really deliver, if it doesn't fit into sort of the structures, the financial capital markets that we're used to, it starts seeing its limitations. And I think this is where a lot of CEOs are really sort of trying to navigate this. And interestingly enough, I think a lot of CEOs today, the reason why this is so high on the agenda, there was a study from Accenture that actually said that more CEOs are pushed out now because of ethical missteps than lack of financial performance. So I think as this topic is sort of maturing, I think CEOs don't really understand how to navigate this. And I think Ben & Jerry's is actually quite a good case for that. I mean, now it's sort of in its own company now. It got spun out from Unilever, so now it's in the sort of Magnum Ice company. For me, the challenge is when you have a structure that has to deliver in the financial markets, but still has to do social activism. How do you navigate that? And it often ends up being a two-headed monster. One says profit and one says do good. So I think that's hopefully the balance that we can dive into today and share some hacks on how to find that.
Yeah, very good point. And you mentioned earlier just now that there's a difference between US and maybe the Nordics and in Europe. Would you elaborate a bit on that? Like, how do you see its difference? We discussed it also in our briefing call a little bit. So.
Yeah, well, it is different depending of the development phase that the country is, and also I think welfare level has a lot to play in this. Also in this Edelman Trust Barometer this year that came out, the latest one, you can also see that the trust differs between the developing or developed markets and all of that. So we need to take this into account. But when it comes to US, I think taking those positions are way more political than I see in Europe, because the political system is different. So it's very polarized in a sense that it is a too big party system. So therefore, there are companies who are clearly defining themselves as we are Democrats or we are Republicans. Yet we come here to the Nordics and we are used to with a multi-party systems and we have coalition governments. So therefore, if you would take a stance on I'm pro this political angle, then you might have a fragment of clients left after that. So I guess we need to balance more, but we're also a smaller market, so we can't really take such risks in a way. But on the other hand, I think our employees and our customers are way more demanding. So it's a really tough spot to be in.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it kind of shows the limitations of corporate activism as well. And US is a brilliant example how difficult that is to work and operate in. I mean, we worked with AB InBev, which is the world's biggest brewer. And a couple of years ago, as some might have read from the news, there was a big scandal around Bud Light. It actually started with a very, very small thing. It was basically a small social media campaign activation. There was this transgender Mulaney whose picture got on one of the cans, and that pissed off the other side of the political aisle, the Republicans. And what's so interesting about that story is really what not to do, because Bud Light is an American sort of heritage brand. It's sort of seen as a brand that could appeal to most Americans. And suddenly, by supporting a campaign, and obviously this little campaign being taken out of context, sort of backlashes, and having a CEO that's not really as good as explaining why that sort of happened. And the interesting about that case is they got hit quite hard financially. The first couple of months, they were down with 25%. But it's also only one of the few cases I know where that is still the case. Bud Light is no longer the biggest beer in America, and the other competitors came in. So I think it showcases this challenge. When you take a stand, the problem is, why do you want to scare half your customers away? And this is exactly what I call the hero trap. I think it's much better to, instead of going on a high horse with your values, understanding that your company's primary mission is to share and support your customers' needs. So what I always advise CEOs to do and companies to do is, yes, you have your principles, you have your values, but so does your customers. And so you really need to take a customer perspective and rather being on the high horse and say, this is what we do, this is what we believe in, maybe just try and lean in a little bit to your customers and see how that goes. And I think that's the commercial reality. And this is probably also why politics and commerce mix a little bit like oil and water.
Yeah, and I would be interested in kind of elaborating on that point, that you bring in the customers, and then we're talking about CEO and corporate activism. It can come in both ways, or either or. So some companies are very CEO in front, and some have it in their DNA, regardless of who's the CEO. And how does that play into the taking also the customers? Because if you do all of it, you do CEO, corporate, and then you have your customers playing, then all of those should be aligned, that it works well. Am I getting somewhere?
Well, yeah, you can't really detach the CEO from the company or from the customers. Yeah. But I mean, we can kind of open it all up and forget the marketing for a second and talk about business strategy. I think this is where it starts. I mean, there is no marketing if you don't have a business strategy. And when you build up the strategy, you actually look at the market and you figure out where is your customer. And now the question is, do you position yourself against the competition, or do you position yourself to solve some kind of a societal issue? And I think it's a bit of a different angle where you start. And once you go it from the societal perspective, I think you will have less conflicts later on as well. But we are, I think, right now living in this era where I think the old way and the new way are both there, and it takes time before maybe all businesses are created from this perspective. And I think there's another topic we need to bring in here, is that what feeds the activism? Because we need to go down to the roots to understand what are those drivers. And there are mainly three drivers, I'd say. That there is this material reflection, and then there is societal, and then there is existential. And these are different type of drivers. And I would say, as a CEO, deal with material or societal drivers are way more easier, because I kind of know how to fix that, how to be good with people and how to create socially good environment and all of that. Also material, surroundings, offices, everything, you can do that. Also the same to employees, but also your clients. But when it comes to existential drivers, and here we are talking about, for example, climate change, or we talk about ongoing wars in the world, and no matter where they are, this is where my hands are so short. I can't take a position, but I can't solve those problems. And this is where it becomes tricky. And then I don't think nobody cares how your business model is made.
I think the challenge has been that you've had this thing where you would see a lot of CEOs run around with the SDG pins. It became the expected thing. And I think that really sort of led a lot of companies to embark on this journey. I mean, I've had companies call me to find a purpose. And so on that journey, I think things tend to go wrong, because you have companies who start messing up with issues that they probably in the first place should have kept far away from. And yes, there are sustainability challenges that are high on the agenda, and that takes societal action, but nobody asks, if I'm down and buying a box of cornflakes, I don't need to be faced with climate change or the company's view on climate change. What I need to be faced with is how that relates to the box of cornflakes I'm eating. And this is, I think, where I see the nice middle ground is. And I can give you a very concrete example. I mean, there's a Nordic company called Too Good To Go. It's founded on combating food waste. It's solving a need. I get why they're there. It seems genuine. It's part of the culture. It's part of the DNA. No matter what CEO is there, is going to be able to talk into this. What my challenge is when you then have big resellers that are all talking about food waste, that inherently becomes an issue for me. They say, oh, we care so much about food waste. And then you start looking at how the stores are designed, how it's designed for overconsumption. And so that becomes less genuine and less authentic. And I think that is the thing that we sometimes rush into this. And that's why I feel that where this should have started and where it got wrong was when we don't solve needs from the very onset, we add something to the business model, which is inherently very difficult. I mean, Patagonia, everybody always says, oh, but Patagonia is a perfect example of this. And I'm like, no, Patagonia actually proves the point that mixing corporate activism and commerce is inherently difficult, because for those of you who don't know too much about the Patagonia story, but recently they actually said, okay, we make Mother Earth the sort of stakeholder. But by doing that, they created a structure, a foundation-based structure. So they actually went outside the regular capital markets. And for me, that's a capitalization. That's giving up. That's giving up on corporate activism, because in some ways I feel where these things work really, really well is when you can work within the commercial structures, the reality that most CEOs operate within, because else we are talking about small challenger brands that can be more activistic. But I think if we need to leave the CEOs with something here today, I think most of them are probably working with shareholders. And in that reality, it's inherently difficult to navigate this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point. I started to think, or actually we even discussed it in our team, that if you peel the onion far enough, like, is any company actually fully sustainable, fully ethical, and always right? And so that makes this topic so interesting, because it comes from so many different perspectives, and you can look at it from so many different angles, and kind of always you can argue that was not fully the right thing to do, or that from this side or this side. So I think it's a very complex matter. And from there, I'd like to hear your point of view on, is there, like, where's the line between a universal value and a political opinion? How can leaders kind of define this?
Well, when we talk about activism, everything is politics. Even I always try to, these are always interesting discussions when people try to claim that they don't do politics. Like, no, politics is bad. I don't like it. I don't do politics. Corporate activism is doing politics. Or even civic activism is doing politics, because with your activism, you're trying to influence something in our lives. Either it's a policy or the way of living or something, or even within a company, like organizational culture, you're also creating this. So in a way, I'm sorry to say to everyone, but it's all politics. So we are all politicians, and that's of course so sad, but good at the same time, because when we talk about we don't trust our politicians, we should also ask ourselves, like, do we trust each other then? Do we trust ourselves? Because in the end, it is the art of collaboration, and how do we agree? How do we live together, either in a company or in a society? So it is tricky, but I think clarity here within one corporation or a company is very important. Clarity meaning that the things you say, you have to do, and vice versa. I mean, this is very common to say, talk the talk, walk the walk. Walk the talk, sorry. And then it's really true, because if you say something and then you go against it, then you lose your clients, you lose your people, and then, well, this is what takes the trust away. And that's why we don't trust the politicians, because sometimes they say something and do the opposite. And so that's the problem. So for CEO, you just have to be always aware that you live what you preach.
I think you to a certain degree are right in terms of corporate activism becoming almost public lobbying. And quite self-serving lobbying most of the time, to be honest, because you have company XYZ maybe advocating for harder climate goals because they're already on that journey, and that might set the competition at a disadvantage. So there's a certain truth to that. I think the challenge, though, again, is when you try and mix those two things, it often goes wrong. And I think we see this in this really fragmented time with a lot of geopolitical pressures. And this is where I think CEOs most of the time actually get this wrong, whether that is on diversity and inclusion, whether that is on climate change, whether that is on a stance on war. And that's also why most of the time what I advise leaders to do is actually, as much as humanly possible, to stay away from that open politics. Stay close to what your company is doing, the role that you're playing in your customers' lives, and what your products and services delivers. Because as soon as you venture too far away from that, you start losing, I think, the trust and also the relevance in that conversation. And I think right now is such an interesting time because sometimes a lot of these things are forced on you. I mean, there's been a big debate right now around Anthropic, and the U.S. government obviously pressuring them to enter into defense agreements. Things like complete no-goes in many ways, surveillance on U.S. citizens, adopting AI into military technologies. And so that's a thing that's forced upon a company that decided to take a financial hit and saying, we're not interested in this contract, we're going to say no. But what's interesting about that, and I think this brings another dimension into why this has sort of become a sort of very pivotal thing for the CEO, is some of these conversations aren't necessarily just led by sort of external factors, but also internal factors, because the workforce today is fundamentally different than it was when I started. The young generations, they want a purpose, they want to work for something that adds meaning to their lives. And I think the Anthropic case actually shows something very interesting, that to get high quality people that knows AI, it's a very tough competition. So in this case, what I'm seeing right now is actually, even though they're doing it silently, it does seem like a lot of the big tech players right now are saying, it's not actually only hitting Anthropic. This is going to hit all of us, because we're facing the same evil that if we don't manage these societal expectations or these expectations from employees, we can't deliver. And we saw that with Google a couple of years ago before Anthropic, where Google had to say, sorry, Defense Department, we can't work with you. Our staff says no.
Yeah, that's a very good topic. I'm going to take this on, having a very strong opinions on this, especially like where you can remain more neutral and where you have to take this strong position. Because when I said before that we need to also talk about the drivers of activism, and then if it is an existential issue, in a way, and we can bring an example from our own lives right now, and talking about employees. Like if you would not take a position on the aggression war in Ukraine, you would not have anyone to work for you anymore, or you would not have any clients. When we talk about those countries who have the border with Russia, I'm pretty sure that's quite the same in all Baltic countries, Poland, probably also in Finland. So this is where, in a way, the material, social, and existential drivers are all combined, and which means it's a yes or no question. There is no middle ground. If you would remain in the middle ground, it's not my position, here to take. You just, let's live happily ever after, and I'm just doing my business. I'm sorry, but you're dead after that. So this is where I have this perspective that you need to kind of understand how close this issue is to your skin, and not meaning you personally, but your key stakeholders. And if it is very, very close and it becomes existential, then you can't remain neutral. If it's something that is, further from you, okay, let's take another war that's ongoing right now, let's say in Iran, or another conflict in Palestine. We take positions in our region as well, and there are some people who have very strong opinions on it, yet there is no unanimous pressure from stakeholders to definitely take the position. People will not leave you because of this. So, because it's not so close to your skin, you personally. So, yeah.
But I think this is also probably one of the cases, again, where I would really warn leaders to be very careful in terms of navigating these sort of forced upon you existential threats. And I actually do think that one of the things around that, which is really the Achilles heel of corporate activism, is sometimes this pitching to you to choose a side. And obviously this is the classic corporate activism that we come to know. But there is also a very good stand in taking the middle ground. A lot of companies both have Ukrainians, Russians, potentially employed when these things were happening. And so how do you take a position that includes everyone? And for me, as you said, introductory wise, I mean, I have a foot heavily planted in sustainability and another one in sort of business. And for me, the most sustainable thing to do is to be inclusive, not exclusive. And that's what I don't like about most corporate activism, is it actually says, you are not right, we are right. And I think as long as you as a CEO can avoid those types of positions, because they might come back to haunt you. Wars don't hopefully last forever. Conflicts tend to change. And also, we do see this, the media cycles are much faster right now. We didn't see this type of tokenism where people put an Israeli flag or Palestinian flag up on social media. I mean, if I look back at my parents' generation, I mean, there was apartheid in Africa, South Africa, that was the big thing. You would maybe boycott South African wine. Vietnam War, sort of, somewhere out there. But we didn't have as many. And I think this constant news cycle, this constant social media thing that is drumming up a lot of issues, I think this is where leaders really need to not put on the short beam, the long beam, and really think wholeheartedly, what do we want as a company? And how do we avoid maybe sometimes pitching these cases against each other? Where you need to pitch cases against each other is if it's fundamentally value aligned. And this is where it's very important, like Anthropic and some of these companies, where it's basically an existential threat to your business model, because you're not going to have any employees if you start taking on contracts that just seems contrary to an already a technology that is already seen as endangering livelihoods and businesses.
This is where the organizational culture becomes very important. The word you said, being inclusive, that's very important. Because if you have those conversations and you have those situations that you do have Russians and Ukrainians together working in your company, then these are the issues that you need to talk with people. But if you don't have the culture that we actually talk about our problems, then this is where bad things start to happen. So if there's an elephant in the middle of the room and everybody and the CEO avoids this problem, then, this is a really short-term piece in that organization. I've been researching societal frictions. At Milton, we've been doing for 3 years now this friction study to understand our societal agency. Like what takes it away or what adds to it. And agency is something, me being able to act in a society based on my own values. Like I feel good, I don't have to pretend to be someone else and remain active. And interestingly, one thing that we learned from there is the thing that gives back the societal agency to people is workplace. Workplace where you can actually have open conversation, talk to your colleagues, talk to your leaders, because you don't trust the news cycle anymore, you don't trust the politicians anymore. And then you ask, where do you have the conversation that you feel that you actually believe what is discussed? And it's workplace and family. So we need to feed on that, I think.
And the same came with the Edelman Trust Barometer, that actually people are looking, they know that we're polarized, but they're looking for their employees to kind of get people together. So inclusivity comes.
Yes. But I think that's also where most of the time this tend to happen is obviously that in some ways a company is a sort of microcosm of society, right? It represents, many political views. And I mean, there was this thing that happened at the first time when the US president was elected into office, his first term, and leadership at Google did this little hangout and quite openly didn't really appreciate the political direction the country was taking. And that's difficult because you have a leadership who is not necessarily acknowledging the process of democracy. Now we can obviously laugh at that looking back at what happened some years later. But obviously a lot of people within the company also felt that their views and their vote wasn't represented. And I think that's a difficult thing. But where I do sometimes see, and now we're talking more the classic corporate activistic companies, and these are the sort of challenger brands, organizations that are founded recently on a very clear principle. What sort of puts them apart a little bit is that they don't have that same type of representation. It's actually quite similar people. It's a very strong culture. It's a very single-minded culture. And in that way, you can have a much more opinionated leader because we're for them and we're not for them. And in those specific instances, I think CEOs can be much more value-driven. And we do see that with brands like Tony Chocolonely, Oatly, to a certain degree in the early days of Oatly, at least. And so there are some of those companies. And what's interesting about them is that they are actually going after the Achilles heel of big companies. Because big companies can't have as strong positions because they represent many different types of stakeholders, many different types of political views. So in that way, they can use that as their little sling, the little David sling against Goliath. And I think this is where corporate activism can be a really great growth driver for brands who decide to do this and do this really, really well. I can give you an example from the Netherlands at the moment. There's a breakfast cereal company called Heli, a couple of years old. And what they go after is just saying, if we look at breakfast cereal, it's actually almost candy. There's so much sugar in it. Why don't we go up against that, go up against the big cereal companies? And that's an interesting thing to live for. Healthier children, us all quitting sugar as much as humanly possible. And that can be a really, really effective growth driver. And they're seeing that growth coming through because they're very single-minded proposition and they're all very value-aligned in terms of what they want to achieve.
Referring to different brands, then I'm a big fan of Finnish brand Finlayson and everything that they've done. And I have to kind of admit the secret that after they did a campaign on pay gap, I think it was 7 or 8 years ago, and it was a very strong message. I only buy their products. So you see, they spoke to me. Because I do think it's a problem. We need to address this. And what's even more interesting in this case is that what they do, they're a textile company, but they take on societal issues that in a way are not directly linked to their business. But on the other hand, they have people who work for them. They have clients. I'm the client. I care for this. So to me, they're really, really brave. But what they also show is that if you take on these kind of challenges, let's put it this way, you have to have let's say you have to have strong nerves because they also got into trouble by doing that. I remember looking at this even a little bit. I was even a little bit laughing that this is so Finland. That first they addressed the problem, and then they accused them of discriminating men because they gave some products cheaper only for women.
They paid the woman's euro for that.
So they showed how a life of a woman really is because of the pay gap, and then they became guilty of discriminating men, but then again they hold on to it. You have to kind of hold on to this position, otherwise you become okay, you did it only because you think it's good for the business, or you do it because you really believe in it. So, but then again, it can take another level because some companies. What is the soap company? I forgot the name.
Lush.
Yeah, Lush, who took all the shops away from UK. So they lost huge amount of money because of that. But I think it was the risk they took knowingly. I mean, you can't count what's going to happen to your business if you close those shops, right? So
at least you should.
Yes, you should be able to calculate that. So I really do admire those companies, but I do think also that they're very rare. Most do not dare and maybe cannot also afford it. There are big questions there. Yeah.
But I think this is where I have sort of seen the biggest weakness is that, a company is no more moral good than what the spreadsheet allows it to be or what the spreadsheet shows. And it's sad to say that maybe Milton Friedman was right to a certain extent. But I do unfortunately see a lot of instances where it does seem like money does still win this game in the short term, at least with the pressure. And I think especially as CEOs, they have shorter tenures, they sit shorter time in the seat. It's become much more of a sort of let's go in, let's turn around, let's get the growth numbers and let's get out to the next position. And I think that puts a lot of stress on the financial systems in terms of delivering the quarterly results. And that's not great for activism. And it's not great for societal change because a lot of these things that we talk about, payment gaps, climate change, energy transitions, it's long perspectives. It's probably not even going to be the CEO who started that change that's going to see it through. And I think we've seen that with Unilever when Paul Polman launched the Sustainable Living Plan in 2010. Great ambitions, a company-wide effort. I very much felt so. I was there at the embankment. I believed in it. And now, obviously, we see a change of leadership, much more into an operationalizer, somebody who wants to do quick wins. Not to say that they have completely disregarded that across the business, but the business has, in some instances, had to live up to the shareholders and also activist shareholders, some on one side, but also some on the other side. And then I think one thing I really like you touched on is this. There's no evergreen sustainability topic anymore. When you do something for women, it comes hitting you in other ways. So it's kind of like trying to chase a rainbow. As soon as you think you're there, you're not really. The topic is constantly moving, sometimes forward. Unfortunately, as we're seeing at the moment, sometimes it moves backwards a little bit. So I kind of feel that for everyone who is sort of sometimes involved in this topic, it kind of feels a little bit like a roller coaster ride. And you have to prepare yourself for it. But that's also why it's difficult to take these very one-sided stance on something if you don't keep innovating. And a very good prime example of that is Body Shop. Body Shop was really one of those brands that pioneered ethical beauty and cosmetics. I mean, when Anita Redricks was there and she did her thing, she did actually change regulation, as you say, with politics sort of coming into the very core of the business. But they didn't really sort of keep up with the agenda. And suddenly you see lots of other brands, Lush and others coming in. And now what seems to have been a powerful company, an ethical, in some ways, pioneer. I mean, the business is failing. They're not keeping up with what they should be keeping up with. So I think it's also important to kind of remind the CEOs out there that you need to keep innovating. You need to keep your ears on the ground and understand where society heading. And I think this is where your analogy with politics in some ways hold true, right? There's somebody who vote every day with the dollar or the euro or their, Danish crown or whatever it might be for the product that they believe in. And if you don't stay true to what consumers, your stakeholders, your shareholders expect, you'll lose out.
And there is also every day someone who becomes 18 and is eligible to vote. And there is a new generation after new generation who has different values. And if you, as a business leader and CEO, do not understand that society is changing, then you're going to be losing. But I want to pick on one more thing that you said before. You said that in short term, money wins, and I fully agree with you, it wins. But I would like every CEO to ask a question from themselves. What kind of money? Yes, it's so easy, short term. Let's make loads of cash. I think if you and I will put our heads together, we can do that. But what kind of money is the question, and who is it that you as an individual want to be? So I love to have a good night's sleep. And it's directly related to what I do during the day and how do I feel about it. So it's a question.
Still line.
No, but I think there's, the short cycles, the pressure to deliver quarter results. Well, we put that aside, and I think this is very relevant for what's happening right now geopolitically, where a lot of companies are faced with unprecedented uncertainty. I never experienced that in my life. I think we tend to forget the long-term drivers of what is going to happen, and I think this is where a lot of CEOs still stay true to what sustainability means to the business. If we look at the big mega trends that are shaping society, yes, AI and digitalization is there. It's transformational, but we forget the other mega drivers, and all those mega drivers actually have sustainability in there. So whether there's resource scarcity, water being a big one, energy transition, how are we ever going to feed our digitalization if we don't figure out the energy transition, climate change, demographics, the demographic change that we're seeing right now. Yes, we're seeing a lot of young people, but we're also seeing a lot of older people that got a lot of spending power and that like to vote, and that tend to like to vote a little bit more conservative than people in the big cities like. And so there's a lot of pressures there that are playing out. And I think this is always, when I go into those types of conversation, yes, you can take on the short beam, but that's not a very safe way to sort of drive for too long. You can completely shut off the headlights. Probably not a very wise strategy. I do see some companies applying that at the moment. But I think wholeheartedly, again, that the companies who apply that high beam are the ones that are going to win. And I mean, we've done studies on it, but mostly on so the brand equity, which is, again, 80% of a company's value. So we can't really discredit the brand for being the one that we researched there. So we looked at a decade of environmental, social brands and campaigns. And the interesting thing there was that what we could see was that the ones who stayed true all those 10 years, a Dove is a good example, actually reaps the benefit in the long term. But the ones that started zigzagging disappear, or the ones that didn't keep up with the time disappear like a Body Shop. So I think there's a really great lesson in that high beam.
Talking about sustainability, I again have to agree with you here that everything we do, it's related to sustainability, because all those things that you mentioned, water scarcity and so on, everything in the end leads to conflicts in the world. You can't really erase those from each other. I mean, they're always there together. And one of the study we did last year, we also asked from the people in the Baltic countries and in Finland about what gives them hope, and also what are the things that they expect companies and governments to solve so that they would feel better and have better belief to the future. And we asked for short-term and long-term. Interestingly, for short-term, people expect quick solutions related to economics and defense. So we want to feel safe, and we want to be able to pay our bills and continue living the welfare life that we have. And long-term solution in all those countries was related to climate and nature. So I think this is what our stakeholders, or not our stakeholders, our employees and customers want. So then let's go back to the businesses and see if this is what we are offering. But again, it's complex, so I don't have a 1 + 1 = 2 solution here.
It's a complex topic to have 1 + 1, but let's try. Let's try to draw it all together. I think we've discussed what it is, what are the benefits, what can be the cost, some real life cases, and now let's try to draw some guidelines for the leaders listening out there. And I'll start by throwing in why, what, how and when. Let's discuss those 4, because I think we might get into some guidelines through that. So let's start with why, like Simon Sinek would say. So why should leaders do this? Why should they take a stand?
Again, I mean, most of the time it ends up being public masturbation or self-serving lobbying. So I think in most cases, probably they shouldn't. I would start a completely different place. I would start at looking at what are the needs that you solve as a company and focus on that. Don't run into the hero trap and being too much value obsessed. You need to stay on your values, but you need to understand your customers and the journey that they are on. So I think always the closer, it can be so easy to be drawn into some of these conversations. And because you have 5 or 10 values, looking at them and, the little value thing, being captivated by that. I think it is really staying close to solving those needs and looking at, 20 years of working in this, the companies that I see have been successful, keep going at it with trust and authenticity are those that stay very, very close to that. The ones that venture out, they might fall out of time because it's not in time anymore. They might go aboard and be too activistic on something. And that's, again, when I said, it's unfortunately no better than spreadsheets. So it's a challenge.
I think what Thomas just described to me can be summarized with word societal business design, meaning that you stay connected to what people around you really want and need. And then when you build on that, then it is less realistic that you will go into conflict. But surely you also need to be aware that you are talking to your customers, not to everyone. Every business is not made for every person out there, right? So you probably are targeting. Some do chocolate only for Thomas's, and some do a lemonade only for Annikas. And then you need to make sure that the thing that you offer resonates with those people. But those people have communities around them, and this is where it becomes more tricky, and that's why the societal design is needed.
Yeah, well said. That's also a little bit of the what, what to do. I'm throwing it out there that when I did some reading, it was often said that CEO activism and corporate activism, it should be driven by the real need or want to create change. That should be the why. Would you agree on that?
I think it depends on where that change comes from. I think what got a lot of companies into trouble was that you took a recipe that worked really, really well for challenger brands like Patagonia, Tony Chocolonely, and others, and then you apply that to much more complex businesses, multinationals, and others that doesn't necessarily operate in that same environment. And I think this is kind of where some of this got wrong. In its most purest form, it's amazing, and it's a growth driver. And as I said earlier, if you've got a CEO who is value-led, that can be your biggest asset. Just obviously make sure that when that CEO departs the business, that this is a culture thing. And I've spoken to different CEOs for my second book. Daniel Lesebsky from Kind Snacks. It's not a snack company that's so well known in the Nordics. But basically, he was an Israeli immigrant to the U.S. who came from one quite divided country to yet another divided country. So he created a snack bar on the principles of kindness. And how he argued that was to say that because this granola bar, snack bar, is made of ingredients that are kinder to the planet and to you, we promote kindness. And it's become a culture thing. So when you go into the office, he preaches kindness. The customers engage in generous acts. They would go to the U.S. border to Mexico. They'll leave water. They'll leave food for illegal immigrants who are passing through there. So that ethos, I think, can work really, really well. So it's not that I'm necessarily discrediting that. I think for most businesses, this is quite a dangerous path to go down. And that's where I think, whether it's a business structure, whatever, it needs to be in your operations. And also sometimes I would say beware that this agenda is not CEO-led, because quite often it becomes top-down. It's very important that it becomes bottom-up. It's a culture thing.
Yeah, well, I'll take this response on a very personal level. As being a CEO, our brand purpose is we empower change makers. So, and I have to live that purpose every day. And it's not have to, I want to. So I'll make sure that I act every day based on that. And in our case, it really is bottom up. We do talk about this and we take on the discussions of, is this a client that we want to really work for? Because are they the change makers we want to empower? Is the change that they are driving for something that makes the society better? So we ask always those questions. Sometimes we have heavy debates with our team. Is this in conflict with our values or not? Do we want to go there or not? But I always try to push this conversation or nudge this conversation towards asking a question. If something is maybe not fully in our value context yet, but you see that they have the will to change, to become better in something, then wouldn't it be a good thing for us to put our energy in there to make sure that they actually do that? So I don't want to judge anyone based on what they're doing today if they're saying that, but I want to know how to do this thing better. Or I want to be more aware of what the society around us needs. And if that's the case, so I see that let's say the attitude is right, then we go along. So I think that every CEO in a way should be a change maker. Again, there's a question, what kind of change? As I said before, what kind of money? And then what kind of change?
I think that's an excellent bridge to the how, you already said. I think often people think about communication, which is an excellent part. Let's come to that soon. But also that is the actions that you take or the inaction. Like you said, that it's the partners that you choose to work with, and it's everything that you do can be taken as a stand in a way. Is there anything else about the how? Like I said, the communications or
I think quite often that change actually can come from a lot of different places, and I think that's why it's never really too late to address some of these topics. I mean, one of the classic sort of examples in this space is obviously Interface, carpet company, oil-based carpets at that time. The change didn't actually come from the CEO. It actually came from an internal working group that started asking themselves some questions after they read a book about sustainability and said, hey, wait a moment, our product is made of oil, maybe we need to rethink this. And so I think that sort of urgency for change can come from a lot of places. I think what a lot of leaders today are underestimating is the danger that a lot of these topics force upon their current business models. Let's be honest, there is a lot of business models today that probably are extractive, that most of the time are not paying the real costs of those products and services that are being delivered to consumers. And it can be a hiding and waiting game. And you can say, yeah, I'm CEO here for 3 to 5 years. I'm onwards to something else. But at some point, that bill will hit you, and it won't get smaller. And I think this is where it's so pivotal to take this quite seriously and try and really use this as a moment. And then the other thing I would say is, if we look at it sort of objectively, the thing is that we get drawn to opinionated leaders. We get drawn to brands that is strong and opinionated brands. The strongest brands in the world are brands you hate or love. I might love Apple, you might love IBM, and that's absolutely fine. But being in that middle field and just going one with the wall and being part of the tapestry is not going to really help anyone, and it's not going to help you as a CEO either. And I think this is why this agenda is so important. And I understand why, as a CEO, it must be extremely challenging because there's many other things you already need to be dealing with in your business. And suddenly also ask you to have an opinion about all these things. And that's where I say that probably the most dangerous thing is just to put on that STD pin because it seems like the right thing to do. Or maybe do that update around Ukraine without really thinking about what that might mean to your business. And I think this is where the biggest danger is tokenism So reach down deep in your values, the need of the customers, and you'll have a good North Star.
Yeah, very good point. And I think discussing the how that when you do that, then probably leaders also need to be ready to have a discussion. Actually, when they make a stand, they need to be ready to kind of take in the arguments, and it's not like a one-way communication campaign that you're doing. That it usually comes with some sort of response. And
yeah, I guess the word thought leadership is here maybe the right term, because this is where I think you can show and share what do you stand for, and this is where, as you said, the dangers lie, right? Because it's a thought leadership, so you really need to be sure what is it that you preach for, and it shouldn't be only preaching, because I think in business it's both things. It's preaching and acting on it.
That's again a good bridge to the final points of our guidelines. The win. That's how can leaders kind of make sure that they're not the one following? Usually, if you're the first one to take a stand on a topical issue, then you kind of get the credit, even though it needs to be authentic as well. But how can leaders kind of make sure that they're not the one who's just following others' lead, but also that they're not irrelevant, saying things that are not really timely? How does the when kind of bake into it?
Well, I think first we should, each and one of us need to define what winning is for us. It can be something very different. More money is not always winning, or a true societal impact can be winning if it's a positive thing. So you need to define that first. But for me, I think like how to be ready for this, or how to make sure that whatever the win is, that you get there, is stay curious. You really need to stay curious to understand what's going on around you. If you're not aware of what's going on around you, you can't take those positions, and there's no way you're going to win then. Remaining curious doesn't only mean that I read his book. Maybe I need to read a bit more, and sometimes I need to fly to the place to really understand. Maybe that's my market, but I have never been physically there. You need to go there. You need to be with the people and understand. So if you're just a CEO in your lonely tower, that's a big problem. So stay curious.
Yeah, I can tell you a very concrete example of the challenge that I think a lot of CEOs are faced with today. Some years ago, I was doing a lecture at Copenhagen Business School, and there was a couple of big Danish companies present, and they'd done their presentations. And then I asked, there's probably 500 business students in the room, and I asked them, so how many of you want to go and work for any of these quite purposeful, sustainable companies? A lot of them ranked in the top 10. And only 30, 40 people raised their hands. And I was shocked by not bigger support for what would be the crown jewels of doing this right. And so I asked them, so why not? I mean, and the answer I kept hearing again and again was, I'd probably rather want to go and work at a startup, or probably work for myself. And why I want to share this story is basically that I think the best leaders today create platforms for growth. They enable the employees, and the employees might buy into the values for some time, but if you don't help them grow, they're going to be out of that door very, very fast. So I think the best leaders I see are the ones that take much more of a town hall approach, rather than the leaders I unfortunately grew up with, where leadership was defined by clear compass, this is my way, or you're out of here, which in so many ways was represented by a guy like Steve Jobs. It was a very value-driven company, but I don't think that type of leadership actually fits how the new generation operates in the workplace. So go much more town hall, understand how you create platforms for growth. I think that's the way forward to embracing a very volatile and a very fragmented workforce.
Yeah, I signed that.
Both voted that. Hey, to close, I'd like to hear, we've discussed a whole lot of things. So what would be the one thing that you wish a leader would take in from this discussion? Let's start with Annika.
Remain true to your own values. You can't inspire others, lead others, or have a positive impact on anything unless you remain true to your own values.
Well said. How about Thomas?
I think you realize that you're borrowing leadership and you're passing it on to the next leader. And so in that sense, you're sort of a captain of a ship. And I think too few CEOs understand that it's not just you who are getting the ship in there in safe harbor, and you need to pass it on. So for me, I always begin with this essential question: who can you help people become? Make sure that what you do as a company becomes an amazing platform for growth for everyone. And if that sometimes means that you have to stick your neck out to defend your ship, your crew, then do it. But just realize that no matter what you do, most of the time, the spreadsheet rules. So just have that in the back of your mind before you take that decision.
Yeah, I always tell to my team that whenever you go out there and you fail, you can be sure I will be there and I will protect you no matter what. But then we go back and we have a discussion. What went wrong? So we will all learn from this. And I think this is the role of a true leader, to make sure that your team, as you said, has a proper growth platform, but they also feel safe. If you don't allow your people to fail sometimes, then they don't learn. But in order to get there, you need to kind of promise them that there is safety around taking those risks. Well, until the spreadsheet is correct.
Yeah, I guess there's really no growing without learning, and learning comes through failure, and that's
but this is not so self-evident in the world.
Unfortunately,
sometimes we just put people off because we don't accept mistakes. But how do you learn? How do kids learn otherwise?
And I think it's a good point to end with. I think if I look at my career, I mean, my first book, Good Advertising, it's in the word. It was very value driven. It was very classic activism. It was advising leaders to take one stand and fight for it to the death. And I learned along the way, and had to realize that no CEO, no company is an island, and you need to take a different approach and really think about. To be ready for those failures, to embrace the living, amazing thing that society also can be, and a final note on that is probably also just remind us that we live in a democracy, and democracy doesn't necessarily win by not being, you're not this and that, I don't like you because this or that. We all live in a democracy. We're all living within one roof in a company, so we all need to respect each other. And about a year ago, I was walking in the streets of Copenhagen, and there was this poster from the municipality of Copenhagen. And it wasn't an election time or anything like that. It's just white letters, simple font on a blue background. And the only thing it says was, it's okay to disagree. And in some ways, maybe that is the most powerful reminder in all of this, that, let's just sometimes agree to disagree, but also agree that we're all citizens, we're all corporate citizens, and need to get along together, because else we all fail.
And let's disagree respectfully. And I think this is what we need. And we have lost that somewhat, at least in social media, I think.
That's a very good point to close. Thank you. Thank you, Annika, and thank you, Thomas. And you all out there, tell us what you thought about this discussion. Tell us on LinkedIn, join us the discussion, and tell us, is there any room left for a neutral CEO? What do you think after hearing this discussion?
Dare to disagree, I would say.
Exactly. Respectfully. I'm Heli, and on behalf of NBF, thank you.